This essay example, as well as thousands of others, is available in text format on our website for free and without registration. Simply Google Ivy Panda Free Essays.
Introduction. American history is considered the most curious worldwide. Traditionally, American history started with the Declaration of Independence in the year 1776. This declaration was due to threats from the British government towards the American self-governed system. Declaration of Independence led to a war in 1775 that was to liberate Americans. With the help of France in providing military and financial support, the Patriots won the American Revolution. In 1789, war hero George Washington became the first president of the federal government by virtue of the Constitution. With the influence of the European community, coping with the scope of the central government proved to be a challenging issue for the American people. In the 1790s, political parties were created and later fought for the Second Independence in 1812. Consequently, this brought about the expansion of United States territory westwards. With this, the United States overcame modernizers who were solely interested in deepening its economy rather than helping the American people expand their geography. Heavy demand for cotton in southern states encouraged slavery of Africans even though it was illegal in northern states. In 1860 came the election of Abraham Lincoln as president, and this triggered a crisis in slave states as he dejected the expansion of the slave trade. Amongst the slave states, some of them seceded to form the Confederate States of America in 1861. This brought about the American Civil War from 1861 to 1865. The Civil War. In American history, the Civil War was the most momentous event ever in the United States. This iconic event redefined the American nation, as it was a fight to preserve the Union, which was the United States of America. From the inauguration of the Constitution, differing opinions existed on the federal government's role. It was a belief of Federalists that to ensure the Union did not collapse, there was a need for the federal government to hold on to power. Anti-Federalists, on the other hand, thought that the sovereignty of the new states was to remain within their countries. Anti-Federalists believed that each state had the right to determine its own set of laws, and it was not right to indict them for following the federal government's mandates. Northern versus Southern interests. With the advent of slavery, northern states completely squared off against southern states. The main reason for this was the economic interests of the North and South, which were opposed to each other. In addition, Southerners largely depended on large-scale plantations of cotton, which was more labor-intensive. On the other hand, Northerners were more of a manufacturing region that produced finished goods by making use of raw materials. Southern ingrained culture of the plantation era encouraged slavery because it gave them an inexpensive labor source. The compromise of each group was the fear that one could gain an unequal amount of power. For example, Northerners feared that if more slave states existed, then they would garner unequal power in the nation. Causes of the Civil War. The causes of the American Civil War, which claimed over 618,000 casualties, are traceable back to the early days in the history of the United States when tensions escalated. The main cause was the difference in economic and social capabilities between the North and the South. The South mainly depended on cotton, which meant the urgent need for cheap labor, most probably slaves, as they became a crop economy. On the other hand, Northerners depended solely on industrial products. This disparity, which existed between the two, was the major difference in their economies. The second cause was infighting between those who favored states' rights and those who favored federal rights. The emergence of these two camps that had differences in opinions ignited the war. Third, the American Civil War was caused by a fight between those who were proponents of slavery and those who were against slavery. Another cause of the American Civil War was the growth of the abolition movement. The fact that Northerners were against slavery led to the increase of abolitionists who were against slaveholders. Lastly, when Abraham Lincoln was elected as president, it catalyzed the Civil War, as Southerners believed that he favored the interests of the Northerners because he was against slavery. Aftermath of the Civil War. The surrender of General Robert Lee on April 9, 1865, marked an end to the Confederacy era. However, this did not stop the war completely, as some small battles continued to occur. This was later to end when the last general, Stand Watie, surrendered on June 23, 1865. Abraham Lincoln's vision of reconstructing the nation did not bear much fruit, as it failed to become a reality because of his assassination on April 14, 1865. The radical Republicans imposed military rule on the Southerners, dealing with them harshly until Rutherford Burchard Hayes ended it in 1876. In American history, the Civil War was a watershed event and, most importantly, an event that officially ended slavery. Conclusion. In conclusion, the Civil War was an important event in the history of the American people. Moreover, its iconic stature is very vital, as the proponents who were against slavery became victors because their wish of anti-slavery was satisfied. In addition, it helped liberate the people with different opinions and gave them reasons to live for better ideals. If you want to find more works like this essay on American history, the Civil War, 1861-1865, head over to ivypanda.com. It has a collection of samples with thousands of submissions covering virtually all academic subjects.